Elias Rowan had always lived a quiet life on the edge of the valley, where the green fields met the dry, wide plains. His cabin sat alone near a line of old cottonwood trees, and most days passed slowly, filled with ranch chores, feeding animals, and fixing whatever needed fixing. Elias was a young man, strong from work, but soft-hearted, a little shy, and never good at speaking to others. People in town knew him as the quiet rancher, who kept to himself. He nodded politely to everyone but rarely stayed long enough for conversation. He had lost his parents young and learned everything alone, piece by piece, holding on to the simple ways they taught him. On the evening the storm came, Elias was tightening the barn door to keep the wind from slamming it open. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, low and heavy, and a strange yellow light spread through the valley. He felt the air changing, smelled the coming rain, and hurried toward the cabin. But then he saw a figure moving slowly along the dirt path, a slim shape holding a child close while the wind pushed hard against them. Elias straightened, unsure if his eyes were deceiving him. No one ever came to his ranch without sending word first. As the figure came closer, he saw it was a woman, an Apache woman, with long black hair tied behind her back, her clothes dusty from travel, her shoulders bent from exhaustion. A small boy clung to her side, his cheek pressed against her arm. They looked cold, tired, and completely alone. Elias felt something tug inside his chest, something he rarely felt: worry for someone else. The woman stopped several steps away, breathing hard but trying to stand tall. She looked at him with eyes full of strength and fear at the same time. Her voice shook slightly when she spoke. "My name is Naya," she said. "This is my son, Talon. We need shelter. Just for the night. The storm is coming fast." Elias stared at them for a moment longer. He didn't know her, didn't know her story, and he wasn't used to strangers at all. He was awkward with people, unsure what to say or how to act. But looking at the child's tired face and the worry in Naya's eyes, he felt something stronger than hesitation. He stepped aside gently and nodded. "Come in," he said softly. "You both look worn out. The storm won't be kind tonight." Naya's shoulders dropped in relief. She whispered a quiet thank you and followed him toward the cabin. Her son's small footsteps dragged in the dirt as he tried to keep up. Elias lifted his lantern high to light the way, noticing that the boy kept glancing at him with curiosity. Inside the cabin, the warm glow of the fire softened the shadows. Elias wasn't used to guests, so everything felt slightly new to him, the way his heart beat faster, the way he suddenly wished he had tidied up better. He pushed aside tools and folded a blanket near the fire. "You can sit here," he said gently. Naya lowered herself onto the blanket, holding Talon close. The child slowly relaxed, his small body trembling less as the heat touched him. Elias saw the exhaustion in both their faces. They had clearly traveled a long distance. He brought water and handed it to Naya. She took it with both hands, as if she had been thirsty for days. Talon drank as well, and for the first time, the boy looked up at Elias with a tiny smile. Elias felt something warm sprout inside him, like a small spark he didn't recognize. After a moment, Naya began to explain. Her husband had passed months ago. She had tried staying with her people, then with distant relatives, but life kept pushing her from place to place. Supplies had run out, trails had become dangerous, and winter was approaching fast. She had nowhere left to go, and nowhere she felt safe. She had traveled, hoping to find a place where her son could rest and grow without fear. Elias listened quietly, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't interrupt. He simply let her speak, and something in the way she talked, soft but steady, pulled at him. He could feel her strength, but also the worry she carried like a heavy stone. When she finished, silence settled between them, filled only by the crackling of the fire. "You're safe here tonight," Elias finally said. "You both are." Naya looked at him with gratitude shining in her tired eyes. She reached over to adjust Talon's blanket, tucking it under his chin with gentle hands. Elias watched her for a moment. He wasn't sure why, but he found himself unable to look away. There was something peaceful about the way she cared for her child. As the wind outside began to howl louder, Elias moved to the kitchen area and started preparing a simple meal. Beans, bread, and a little bit of dried meat. His hands shook a little, partly from nerves. He wasn't used to cooking for guests, and he wanted everything to be right. He hoped they would like it. He hoped he wouldn't seem foolish. Naya helped him without being asked. She stepped quietly beside him, assisting with small tasks, stirring, slicing, arranging dishes. She worked calmly, without hesitation, as if she were used to hard tasks and long days. Elias felt strangely calm beside her. Talon sat near the fire watching them both, his eyes brightening as the smell of food filled the room. When Elias placed a bowl in front of him, the boy's face lit up completely. He grabbed the spoon and ate eagerly, and Elias couldn't help smiling. "You like it?" he asked softly. Talon nodded with a mouthful of food. Then he reached toward Elias's coat sleeve and tugged shyly, wanting him to sit nearby. Elias obeyed, unsure what else to do, but strangely happy to be asked. Naya watched the small moment from across the table. Elias didn't notice the expression on her face, a mix of relief, hope, and something deeper. She had seen many men in her life, but something about this quiet rancher made her feel at peace. He didn't raise his voice, didn't pry into her past, didn't look at her like a burden. He simply helped. Later, when Talon grew sleepy, Elias offered his bed for them to use. Naya tried to refuse, but he insisted, saying he could sleep near the fire. She finally accepted, settling her son under the blanket. When the cabin fell quiet, Elias sat by the fire, watching the light flicker across the walls. He felt uneasy, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him aware of how different this night was from every other night in his life. The presence of another person in his home changed everything. The sound of Naya breathing softly as she held her child close warmed the room in a way he couldn't describe. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to share space with someone else, to hear another voice, to see someone smile, to notice the small details of another life moving beside his own. Before falling asleep, Naya shifted slightly and whispered something so soft he almost missed it. "You are gentle. My child needs that." Elias felt his breath catch. He turned his face away so she wouldn't see the surprise on his features. No one had ever said such words to him. No one had ever looked at him with expectation or trust like that. He didn't know how to respond, so he didn't. He simply lay down on the floor pad near the fire, pulling a blanket over himself. Long after Naya and Talon drifted into deep sleep, Elias remained awake. The storm outside roared, shaking the windows, but his thoughts were louder. He wondered why her words stayed with him so strongly, why he cared that she trusted him, why the sight of that small child reaching toward him earlier made his heart feel suddenly full. He didn't understand it yet, but something inside him had started to shift. Something new. Something he had never felt before. Something warm and frightening and hopeful at the same time. And as the storm raged through the night, Elias realized that this one unexpected visit had already changed his quiet life more than he ever could have imagined. When morning came, the storm clouds had drifted away, leaving the valley quiet and washed clean. The sunlight slipped through the window of Elias's cabin and fell across the floor where he lay. He blinked awake slowly, remembering the events of the night. For a moment, he wondered if he had dreamed everything. The knock on the gate, the tired mother, the small child, curled in his arms as he ate. But when he sat up, he saw Naya standing near the fire, gently shaking out the blanket with her son still sleeping beside her. It had not been a dream at all. It had really happened. And his cabin no longer felt as empty as it once had. Naya gave him a soft, grateful smile when she noticed he was awake. Elias wasn't used to waking up and seeing someone smiling at him. It made him sit a little straighter, unsure what to say. He cleared his throat and asked if they had slept well. Naya nodded, saying the warmth of the cabin and the safety around them helped her rest in a way she had not rested in many days. Elias glanced toward Talon, who was curled on the bed with the blanket tucked under his chin. Even in sleep, the boy looked peaceful. Something about that sight softened Elias's heart. He didn't know the child, had never been close to children before, but something about Talon made him feel responsible in a way that surprised him. He went outside to check the ranch while Naya quietly prepared a small breakfast. The air was cool and fresh, and the ground was still wet from the heavy rain. The animals stirred in their pens, shaking off water droplets. Elias walked through the barn, feeding and checking each animal as he always did. But he found his mind drifting back to the cabin. He wondered if Naya and Talon needed anything. He wondered if they would leave soon. The thought made him strangely uneasy. When he returned, Naya had already prepared warm food and set it on the table. She lowered her head slightly when he entered, as if unsure whether she had overstepped by doing chores in someone else's home. He quickly reassured her that he appreciated it. She relaxed and thanked him for letting them stay. Talon woke slowly, rubbing his eyes and stretching his small arms. When he spotted Elias walking in, a bright smile spread over his face. He stumbled off the bed and walked toward Elias with small steps, reaching his arms up without saying a word. Elias froze, surprised at the request, but he lifted the child carefully. Talon rested his head on his shoulder as if he belonged there. Elias felt warmth rush into his chest. It scared him a little, but he didn't pull away. Breakfast passed gently. Naya watched the two of them, Talon clinging to Elias trying to act calm even though he was obviously unsure of what to do. She noticed how careful he was, how he made sure Talon didn't drop anything, how he spoke softly to him, how he didn't seem irritated or impatient the way some men became around children. It made her feel something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. When breakfast ended, Naya began cleaning the dishes, despite Elias insisting she didn't have to. Talon wandered toward the door, curious about the outside world. Elias followed him and gently led him outside. The child's small feet left prints in the soft earth, and he giggled when he saw the chickens running around. Elias showed him how to feed them from his palm. Talon copied him, but dropped most of the grains, causing the chickens to cluck loudly. The boy laughed until his eyes sparkled. Naya stood in the doorway, watching the scene, with hands clasped in front of her chest. For the first time, she saw her son happy and carefree again. She had carried heavy worry for so long that seeing Talon run and laugh felt like someone had lifted a weight off her shoulders. She hadn't realized how much happiness her child had been missing. Elias noticed her watching and gave her a small nod, inviting her to join them. She stepped outside, the sunlight touching her face. She watched Talon chase after a butterfly, his bare feet splashing in small puddles left from the storm. Elias stood near, ready to catch him if he slipped. "You're good with him," Naya said quietly. Elias shook his head shyly. "Trying is more than many ever do," she replied. They spent most of the day doing small tasks around the ranch. Naya helped Elias mend a tier and a horse blanket. Talon followed Elias to the barn, carrying tiny handfuls of hay even though his hands were too small to carry much at all. Elias never corrected him, never made him feel small. Instead, he praised him and let him help in whatever way he could. Talon's chest puffed with pride each time. As the day passed, Naya began to understand something important. Talon wasn't just growing comfortable with Elias, he was beginning to trust him deeply. The child rarely trusted new adults, especially after losing his father and experiencing so much instability. But around Elias, Talon seemed to feel safe, protected, even joyful. Naya watched the simple interactions and felt her heart tugging in a direction she wasn't prepared for. She had met strong men before, skilled men, loud men, but Elias was different. He was gentle, thoughtful in his actions, soft-spoken in a way that didn't make him look weak, but instead made him feel safe. She noticed his awkwardness, his shyness, his inexperience with company, but she also saw how much he cared, even when he didn't realize it himself. Later in the afternoon, Naya helped him gather firewood. They walked together across the yard, Talon riding on Elias's hip. The boy rested his head against Elias's shoulder, completely relaxed. Elias walked slowly, careful not to jostle him. Naya walked beside them, not speaking, simply observing the comfort between them. At one point, the boy whispered something barely audible. "Da." Elias stopped walking as if his boots had sunk into the earth. He looked down at Talon, who was staring at him with sleepy eyes, unaware of what he had said. Naya's breath caught. She didn't correct the child, didn't tell him that Elias wasn't his father. She didn't want to. Something about the moment felt too natural, too right. "I didn't mean for him to say that," Naya whispered softly. Elias swallowed hard, not sure how to respond. It's all right," he said finally, though his voice trembled. He wasn't offended. He was stunned. A child had never looked at him that way before. They returned to the cabin quietly, each lost in their own thoughts. Talon stayed close to Elias for the rest of the day, as though he had chosen him without hesitation. Naya felt a mix of emotions: relief, fear, gratitude, and something deeper that she didn't yet want to name. As the sun began to set, a warm orange light filled the cabin. Elias prepared a simple supper, and Naya helped as always. Talon sat close to Elias, leaning gently against his arm. After supper, they sat near the fire. Talon leaned against Elias again, slowly drifting toward sleep. Elias, unsure what to do, gently picked him up and carried him to the bed. He covered the child with a blanket, smoothing the fabric over his shoulders. Naya watched quietly from the side, her heart softening at the sight. When Elias returned to sit by the fire, Naya took a slow breath and finally spoke the words she had been holding inside all day. "My son. He needs guidance. He needs someone steady, someone patient, someone who will not raise their voice or lose their temper." She paused, choosing her words gently. "I want him to grow in a place where he feels safe." Elias stared into the fire, unsure what she meant or what she hoped from him. "I see how he looks at you," she continued. "You may not see it yourself, but he feels safe around you. He trusts you." Elias felt his heart beating faster. He wasn't sure he deserved such trust. He wasn't sure he knew how to be the person she described. He was quiet, inexperienced, unsure in every step of life beyond his ranch chores. Naya seemed to sense his confusion. She reached slowly for a small wooden toy that Talon had dropped earlier and held it in her hands. "I do not need a perfect man for him," she said softly. "Just a kind one." Her words settled inside Elias like a warm but heavy stone. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what she expected. She wasn't asking him for anything directly, not yet. But he felt something changing around him, something serious and meaningful. As the flames crackled, Elias looked at Naya and then toward the sleeping child. He felt a strange pull in his chest, as if a door inside him had opened, and he could not close it again. He didn't speak, but the silence between them changed. It grew heavier, warmer, more important. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the cabin walls, gentle compared to the storm of the night before. But inside Elias's heart, a new kind of storm was gathering, one made of hope, confusion, fear, and something that felt like the beginning of a bond he wasn't sure he could ignore. The next morning began with a strange quietness inside Elias's cabin. The sun rose gently through the window, painting soft gold across the wooden floorboards. Talon still slept peacefully on the bed, curled like a small kitten under the blanket. Naya had woken early, and stood outside the cabin door, staring at the valley as it stretched into the distance. For the first time in many months, she wasn't thinking about where to go next. Instead, she found herself thinking about what staying in one place might look like, what safety might feel like, what a steady life might give her son. Inside the cabin, Elias woke with a heavy mind. He remembered the conversation from the night before, the one where Naya spoke about guidance and gentleness, and what a child needed. Her words had settled deep inside him. He didn't sleep well because he kept wondering if she saw something in him that he didn't see in himself. He was just a quiet rancher. He wasn't strong with words, wasn't experienced in raising children, and certainly not in being close to a woman. He had spent most of his life alone. So why did she trust him? Why did her child cling to him with such innocent comfort? He rubbed his face and stood up, trying to shake off the weight in his chest. When he stepped outside, he found Naya watching the horizon, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders as the early morning wind brushed past her. She didn't turn when he approached. She seemed deep in thought. "Good morning," he said softly. She turned her head just enough to give him a small smile. "Good morning." Elias stood beside her awkwardly, unsure what to say next. He wasn't used to morning conversations. Usually, he woke alone, fed the animals alone, and worked alone. Having someone standing beside him felt different, strangely comforting, but confusing at the same time. Naya looked out across the valley again. "It's a peaceful place," she murmured. "It is," Elias said. "Quiet. Sometimes too quiet." Naya studied his face for a moment, sensing the deeper meaning behind his words. Elias looked away quickly, embarrassed by the hint of vulnerability he had shown. They went back inside, and Elias prepared breakfast, while Naya folded blankets. Talon woke with a soft yawn, rubbing his sleepy eyes before sitting up. When he spotted Elias across the room, his face brightened like the sun breaking through clouds. He scrambled off the bed and waddled toward Elias with open arms. Elias felt the same confused warmth spread through his chest. He lifted the child gently, and Talon rested his head on Elias's shoulder without hesitation. Naya watched them closely, feeling her heart tighten. The sight was beautiful and painful at the same time, beautiful because her child had found comfort, painful because she wasn't sure how long that comfort could last. After breakfast, Elias took the horses out to graze. Talon insisted on following him, stumbling through the grass with excitement. Elias slowed his steps to match the boy's tiny pace. Talon grabbed onto Elias's pant leg every time he felt unsteady, and Elias always reached down to steady him without being asked. Naya watched from the cabin doorway again, her eyes softening. She could see a connection forming between the two. A steady, natural connection that didn't need words. Talon laughed every time Elias lifted him onto a small log or helped him chase a chicken around the yard. The child trusted him deeply, in a way that only children can trust someone who makes them feel safe. As the hours passed, Naya's worry grew quietly inside her. She knew she couldn't keep wandering forever. She knew her son needed roots, stability, protection. But asking someone to be a father figure for her child was not a small thing. It was not something she wanted to do lightly. And yet, she kept watching Elias. The way he moved, the way he never raised his voice, the patience he showed without effort. Every time she observed him, her thoughts pulled in the same direction. Later in the day, while Elias worked on repairing a small section of the fence, Naya walked toward him carrying a basket of fresh water. Talon followed behind her, dragging a small stick through the dirt. The sun warmed the land, and a soft breeze carried the scent of pine. "Do you need help?" she asked. Elias looked up from his work and wiped sweat from his forehead. "No, but thank you." She set the water down beside him, watching his hands as he worked. She could see how rough they were from years of work, yet how gently he held nails and tools. That gentleness showed the kind of man he was, not harsh, not forceful, not proud, just steady. Talon toddled over to Elias and reached up again, wanting to be held. Elias put down the hammer and lifted him easily. The child giggled, grabbing Elias's hat and placing it crookedly on his head. Elias laughed, a sound Naya had never heard from him before. It was low, warm, and genuine. It made her chest feel strange, almost unsteady. She sat down on a patch of grass nearby, watching them as if she were watching a moment she wanted to keep forever. Elias twirled Talon gently around, careful not to let the child lose balance. Naya's eyes became glassy, but she blinked quickly, not wanting to cry in front of him. When Elias set Talon down, the boy ran back to Naya and climbed into her lap. She held him close, smoothing his hair. "He likes you," she said quietly, "more than he has liked anyone in a long time." Elias didn't know how to respond. He looked down, brushing dust from his pants. "I'm no one special," he said softly. "You are more special than you think," she replied. Her voice wasn't loud or dramatic, but the words felt heavy, important. Elias lifted his eyes slowly. Their gazes met, and for a moment, everything around them felt still. Naya looked away first, taking a breath. She knew she needed to say something harder, something that had been growing inside her, day by day. She didn't want to push him. She didn't want to frighten him. But she couldn't stay silent anymore, not when her son was already forming bonds that ran deeper than simple friendship. She waited until Talon fell asleep in her lap, then gently carried him back to the cabin and laid him on the bed. When she returned outside, Elias was still sitting near the fence, staring into the distance as if lost in thought. She walked toward him slowly, unsure how to begin. "Elias," she said softly. He turned his head, sensing something serious in her tone. "Can we talk?" He nodded, his heartbeat growing nervous. Naya sat down on the patch of grass near him, folding her legs neatly beneath her. The air grew quiet between them, full of unspoken thoughts. "I want to tell you something important," she began, choosing her words with care. "Something I have been afraid to say." Elias swallowed. His hands tightened around the small wooden post he was working on. "I cannot keep wandering with my son," she continued. "He is still young, and the world is not kind to children with no stable place. He needs guidance. He needs someone to teach him how to grow into a strong, good man." Elias looked down, unable to meet her eyes. "I have watched you these days," Naya said. "How patient you are with him, how gentle, how careful. He trusts you in a way he rarely trusts anyone." Elias felt warmth rising in his chest, mixed with fear, mixed with doubt. I don't know how to be what he needs," he said quietly. "I've never raised a child. I've never even lived with anyone before." "I don't ask you to be perfect," she replied softly. Her voice trembled slightly on the last word. Elias looked at her, then really looked at her. She seemed strong on the outside, but he could see how tired she was, how much she had carried alone, how much she had tried to protect Talon. Her eyes held a quiet plea that shook him. Naya took a small breath, lowering her voice even more. "My child needs someone to look up to. Someone who will not leave. Someone who will show him how to grow with good values." She paused, gathering courage. "And you are the only man he trusts." The words fell between them like a stone dropped into deep water, creating silent ripples that neither of them could ignore. Elias felt something inside him shift, something heavy, something serious. His throat tightened as he tried to speak. "Naya, I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if I can be that person. I don't want to fail him. Or you." She shook her head gently. "You won't fail him by trying. But he will suffer if no one tries at all." Her voice broke slightly, and she looked down at her hands as if the truth cost her something to say. Elias felt his heart twisting. He had always lived quietly, never thinking his life would touch anyone else's. But now he was faced with something bigger than ranch chores and lonely evenings. He was faced with a child who looked at him as if he were important, and a woman who trusted him more than he trusted himself. Naya lifted her gaze again, and her voice dropped to a whisper filled with fear and hope at the same time. My child needs a dad, and you are the only man he reaches for. Elias felt his breath leave him in a sharp, quiet exhale. He had never been asked for something so deep, so meaningful. It felt heavy on his shoulders, but also right. He didn't answer immediately. His thoughts swirled like dust in the wind. He felt scared, not of Naya, not of Talon, but of failing them. And yet, the idea of seeing them leave made an ache rise in his chest that he couldn't hide. I need time to think, he finally whispered. Naya nodded, even though fear flickered in her eyes. Take the time you need, she said gently. I would never force your heart. She stood slowly and walked back toward the cabin. Elias watched her go, feeling a storm gathering inside him that was greater than any storm outside. He wasn't sure what the right answer was. But he knew one thing clearly. His life had changed the moment Naya arrived at his gate. And now, he had to decide whether he had the courage to change with it. Elias barely slept that night. He lay near the fire, with his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling, while the crackling flames threw shadows across the wooden beams. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Talon reaching for him and heard Naya's quiet voice saying, "My child needs a dad." Those words didn't feel like pressure, they felt like a door being opened, and he wasn't sure whether to step through or stay where he had always been. He wasn't used to being needed. He wasn't used to anyone looking at him with hope. He wasn't used to the idea that he could be important to someone other than himself. The more he thought, the more his chest tightened and loosened at the same time, as if two feelings inside him were pushing against each other. Fear and longing, doubt and desire, silence and possibility. When the first light of dawn touched the valley, Elias finally sat up. He rubbed his face with his hands and breathed deeply. He didn't have a full answer yet, but he knew he couldn't avoid the decision forever. He needed clarity, and sometimes the fields gave him that. He stepped outside quietly, letting Naya and Talon sleep a little longer. The sky was still soft with morning light, and the air smelled of wet soil and fresh wind. Elias walked toward the fence line where the land spread wide and endless, giving him room to think. He leaned against a post and watched the sun rise over the hills. But even here, even in the place where he always found peace, his heart was restless. He thought about his past, how he had grown up alone after losing his parents. He remembered how the silence of the cabin had often felt heavy, like a blanket he couldn't lift. He remembered holidays spent by himself, birthdays forgotten because he had no one to share them with. He had survived, yes, but he had never truly lived. Then he thought about the last few days with Naya and Talon. How laughter had returned to the cabin. How someone else's voice had filled the empty spaces. How Talon's tiny hands had reached for him without fear. How Naya's quiet strength had warmed the room in ways he didn't know he needed. When he compared the two lives, the one before they arrived and the one with them in it, his chest tightened again. But this time, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like truth. He walked back slowly toward the cabin. Each step felt heavy and purposeful, as if he were walking toward something that could change his life forever. When he reached the door, he saw Naya sitting at the table. She looked as if she hadn't slept much either. There was a worried softness around her eyes, and her hands were wrapped around a cup of warm water that she wasn't drinking. She looked up quickly when Elias entered. Hope flickered in her eyes, but she tried to hide it. "Good morning," she said quietly. "Good morning," Elias replied. Silence settled between them. But not like before. This silence carried weight. This silence waited for an answer. Talon woke a few moments later, stretching and rubbing his eyes. When he saw Elias, he immediately crawled off the bed and toddled toward him with outstretched arms. Elias bent down and lifted him, pressing the boy gently against his chest. The child rested his head on Elias's shoulder, completely trusting. Naya watched the moment, her heart squeezing with both fear and longing. She didn't know what Elias had decided. She didn't want to pressure him. She wanted him to choose with his heart, not out of guilt or kindness alone. Elias set Talon down and turned toward her. She straightened slightly, bracing herself. "I went to the fence line this morning," he began. "I needed to think." Naya's fingers tightened around the cup, though her expression stayed calm. "I know what you said yesterday," Elias continued, his voice low. "I know how important it is, and I want to be honest." He paused, swallowing. "I am scared, Naya. I really am. I've never been a father. I've never been a husband. I've barely been around people at all. Everything you're asking, I don't know how to do any of it." Naya's breath trembled softly. "But," Elias said, lifting his head slowly, "I also know what it feels like to be alone. I know what it feels like to hope for something better. I know what it feels like to watch someone you care about walk away." Naya's eyes slowly filled with emotion. "And I don't want that for Talon," Elias whispered. "I don't want that for you. And I don't want that for myself." For the first time, Naya's breath left her in a shaky sigh. She set her cup down and stood up slowly, her eyes fixed on his. Elias stepped closer, his voice steady despite the tremble in his hands. "I want you to stay," he said softly. "Not as guests, as family." Naya's lips parted, and for a moment she looked like she didn't know how to breathe. You mean that?" she whispered. He nodded. "Yes, I mean it with everything I have." Talon, sensing the change in the room, ran to Elias and grabbed his pant leg with both hands. Elias bent down and scooped him up, holding him securely. The child giggled happily and rested his cheek against Elias's shoulder. The sight made tears gather in Naya's eyes. She stepped closer, lifting her hand as if she wanted to touch Elias but wasn't sure if she should. He looked at her quietly, and then he nodded gently. With that small permission, Naya placed her hand softly on his arm. The warmth of that touch traveled straight to Elias's chest. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You saved us, more than you know." Elias shook his head slowly. "Maybe you saved me too." A soft quiet fell around them, filled not with tension but with peace. Naya lowered her forehead for a moment and took a shaky breath, trying to hold back tears of relief. She wasn't someone who cried easily, but Elias's words opened something deep inside her. They spent the morning working together around the ranch. But everything felt different now. Every small task carried new meaning. Every shared glance felt gentler. Elias helped Talon feed the horses while Naya fixed a torn shirt. Talon held Elias's hand everywhere he went. Naya walked beside them, sometimes touching Elias's arm lightly, as if reminding herself that this new life was real and not just a dream she would lose. Later in the afternoon, Elias carried Talon on his shoulders, walking through the golden grass behind the cabin. Talon laughed loudly, pointing at birds and waving at clouds. Naya walked behind them, watching the sight with a full heart. She didn't feel lost anymore. She didn't feel afraid. For the first time in many months, she felt her life had found solid ground. As the sun began to set, they stood together on the porch. The sky glowed with orange and pink, reflecting off the hills. The air felt warm and calm, and Elias placed his arm gently around Naya's shoulder. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him softly, letting the warmth of his presence settle her. Talon curled against Elias's chest, half asleep, feeling safe in his arms. Elias looked out at the land that had once felt lonely and empty. Now, it felt alive. It felt full. It felt like home. He glanced at Naya and Talon, knowing that this was the beginning of something he never imagined he would have: a family. Something simple. Something real. something he could grow into, day by day. Naya looked up at him with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, "for choosing us." Elias shook his head softly. "No, thank you for giving me something to choose." That night, the cabin wasn't silent like it used to be. There was soft breathing, light laughter, and the gentle sounds of 3 lives moving together instead of one. Naya prepared a small pot of warm tea, Elias fixed the window latch, and Talon fell asleep curled between them, peaceful and secure. Elias watched the child's calm face and felt a deep promise settle inside him. A promise not made with words, but with heart. He would do his best. He would learn. He would grow. He would protect. He would give love in the only way he knew: steady, patient, and honest. When he finally lay down to rest, Naya sat close beside him. She whispered softly, "This is a new beginning." Elias nodded, feeling the truth of it. Yes, it was a new beginning. Not just for Talon, not just for Naya, but for him too. And as the stars filled the night sky outside, the small cabin held something it had never held before: warmth, connection, and the quiet strength of a new family forming from trust, kindness, and the courage to choose each other.